Senior Executive Editor, is with us live. Gaurav, the Indian Army has just amended its statement to say that there were casualties on both sides. Do we have any clarity on what the casualty figures are on the Chinese side? Also, no bullets were fired. This horrifying clash took place in the Galwan Valley, where stones were pelted and metal clubs were used, in which these three horrifying deaths have been reported on the Indian side, including a colonel rank officer who was a commanding officer of the infantry regiment deployed there. What more can you tell us, Gaurav?
Shiv, after yesterday's talks between India and China, it was decided that the Chinese side will move back beyond Petrol Point 14, 15 and 17 Alpha, but the Chinese troops on ground were not following instructions that were given on the Chinese side, is what sources are telling India today. And that's the time that it was decided that this will be ensured that the Chinese side pulls back to the other side of the line of actual control. There was jostling and there was heavy jostling, and that jostling led to use of stones and clubs at the line of control. Now, Shiv, we do have information that there were casualties on the Chinese side. We do not know the nature of casualties. I believe, and this again is source-based information, not coming officially, that some of this was caught on camera and is being analyzed. Now, India initially very politely asked the Chinese soldiers to move back, as had been decided, but the Chinese side resorted to violence. They resorted to stone pelting. They were on a higher plane, at least their reserves were, and that is where there were violent clashes between Indian and Chinese soldiers. There were casualties on both sides, but as you well know, Shiv, the Indian side, the senior army officer, the colonel, was leading from the front himself, and he was injured in an effort to save own soldiers. He led the charge in protecting own soldiers from Chinese assault, and that is where we've had 3 fatalities and some injuries, Shiv.
3 fatalities, several injuries. I can tell you, as the journalist who's broken this story here on India Today, I can tell you that at least 11 Indian Army Jawans have also sustained very serious injuries. Stones were pelted, metal clubs were used. This was last night in the Galwan River Valley at one of those standoff points where this violent clash took place after dark yesterday. It happened in darkness yesterday, and 3 persons, a colonel. We have all the names, ladies and gentlemen. I want to communicate this very clearly, that India Today, unlike many other media organizations, will only give you facts, and we are also sensitive about information. We have the names of the officers and the officer and the Jawans who've lost their lives in this terrible escalation by China, but we will only be releasing them once there is clearance from the army and the families have been notified. That is something that's taking place right now. So the 2 big pieces of information we have right now, as Gaurav was also sharing with us, is that A, no bullets were fired. No bullets have been fired, in fact, between Indian and Chinese troops since 1967 in Sikkim. So that continues to hold. But it was a horrifying close combat clash between troops on both sides, where you had metal clubs and stones being used to bash each other up, and the intensity of this clash can be seen in the fact that 3 hardened army men have lost their lives. 2 army Jawans and 1 colonel rank officer who was the commanding officer of that particular area. A watershed moment, a turning point in India-China relations. Never have troops died in anger for decades between both sides in a clash of this kind. In the 60s and 70s, both sides had clashed several times. This is the first time since that generation that an act of anger has resulted in casualties on both sides. We don't know about the casualties on the Chinese side. We do know that an Indian Army colonel and 2 Jawans have lost their lives on the Indian side. Their mortal remains will be reaching the national capital later today, is what we're hearing as well. The Galwan Valley along the line of actual control happens to accommodate 2 of the 4 standoff points between troops of India and China. There have already been clashes in the area. This is the big clash that took place last night. The exact nature of what triggered the clash is still unclear at this time. All we do know is that there must have been some kind of a collision between troops on both sides. either one side crossed over to the other's camp or vice versa. There was an altercation. Things quickly escalated because things are already extremely volatile in this particular zone. And that's how things have completely spiraled. It couldn't get worse than this. I don't want anybody to think that the media is sensationalizing the story. Believe me when I tell you, and believe me, I'm a military affairs reporter, but when a commanding officer and 2 army jawans are killed in a standoff where lieutenant generals have been talking to try and defuse the situation, it basically means that nothing has worked and the situation is extremely tense. You've had sober voices like Brahma Chelani say this is a watershed moment and a turning point between India and China. We're going to get many more reactions. Gaurav Sawant continues to be with us. Gaurav, what does the army mean when they say that the 2 sides are still trying to meet to defuse the situation? Senior military officials of the 2 sides are currently meeting at the venue to defuse the situation. Where are they meeting? Are they meeting at the Galwan Valley?
Shiv, talks are on at the Chushul-Moldo border meeting point as they are ever since the 6th of June. So first the corps commanders met, then the brigade commanders met, and currently the dialogue was between the battalion commanders. That is to ensure that troops move back, and it's the battalion commanders on ground who ensure movement of troops on ground because they know the exact tactical location. Now, subsequent to that discussion yesterday, own troops were trying to ensure that the Chinese troops move back from Petrol Point 14, the Galwan area standoff. Now, initially, the Chinese troops, as you well know, Shiv, had come all the way to the Galwan River and Shyok confluence. Gradually, they had started moving back, and it took several rounds of conversation to get them to move back. But LAC hadn't been restored completely. Yesterday, the decision was that LAC would be restored at Galwan. Now, after the meeting, when that action was happening on ground to ensure the Chinese troops on ground were hesitant, what was decided in the meeting was not being implemented on ground by the Chinese soldiers, and this led to initially the Indian soldiers very politely asking the Chinese soldiers to move back. The Chinese soldiers apparently got violent. As you well know, the Peace and Tranquility Agreement ensures that no weapons are fired in that area, no weapons are used. That is where the Chinese soldiers, we are told, started stone pelting. They also had nail-studded clubs like they did in that earlier encounter, and that is where violent clashes took place on both sides. Initiated, we are told, by the Chinese. We've had 3 fatalities. We've had several serious non-fatal injuries also to own troops. So the situation remains extremely grim. We are told commanders are engaged on ground to ensure that the situation is held and it doesn't deteriorate further, Shiv.
Just wondering what kind of deterioration further could actually happen in this regard. It's incredible that something like this could happen. Gaurav, thank you very much, but continue to stay with us. Is there a more detailed statement that we're expecting from the Indian Army, Gaurav?
Shiv, hopefully as the situation develops, we will get more information from the army. As you well know, you broke the story, Shiv. Source-based information started coming in earlier this morning, but we were not going on air with it till the time the army came out officially with a statement, for the simple reason that, the Chinese used and try and misuse every bit to their advantage, and the effort was to ensure that the sanctity of the LAC is restored as quickly as possible, which is what the Indian Army has been constantly telling us, that the government is ensuring that the sanctity of LAC is restored. But India, as you well know, Shiv, is now deployed and prepared for any eventuality, hoping, of course, against hope that the Chinese will see reason and withdraw.